Alright, so now let's take a closer look at the dynamics in the pyramid as the cartel banks create liquidity. And I'll show that storm diagram again here in the background as we talk through this. So the banks create liquidity by holding the debt of both the private sector and the public sector. And note, they really aren't pumping out actual money, but just putting everything else in the system in debt, which sucks the outer bands into the vortex. And that debt generates all the corporate spending and government spending in the system, which sucks all of us into the storm. And then the value we create gets sucked in and pumped back up the pyramid through interest and taxes. And this cash flow diagram here means that the pyramid governs both the private sector economy and the public sector. These aren't really two different systems, but two components of one monetary vortex, which reveals the lie of the cliched socialism versus capitalism debate. The versions of socialism and capitalism we live under today are actually part of the same system. And note that this isn't community-level socialism advocated by classic liberals, but mega national socialism controlled by DC. Nor is this the small-town sort of free market Main Street advocated by classic conservatives, but mega empire-level capitalism controlled by Wall Street and imperial corporations. So these aren't two different systems, but two sides of one financial dictatorship that runs everything out of Wall Street and DC. And that word dictatorship probably sounds harsh, but it's really worth dwelling on this until you see through the freedom propaganda. And here's just one example. A country where a couple Ivy League economists can get the central executive to transfer trillions in wealth from 308 million people up to bankers, the richest clique in the country. By definition, that's a dictatorship. And as discussed in Lesson 4, this system is driving us perpetually toward bigness. Big government on the left of this diagram and big business on the right. And this means we're living in hidden fascism. Fascism wasn't really about Hitler or what our history books tell us. It's about mega banking institutions fueling big government and big corporate business, both of which work together to control everything. That's the powerful, efficient structure of fascism. The politician that happens to be in office at the time has very little to do with it. And then we can see another aspect of what I'm calling fascism here if we break the public debt half of the diagram into left versus right. So we can see here how public debt fuels both sides of our political system. The left sells the population into deeper indebtedness with welfare arguments, and the right does the same with warfare. The big bank cartel profits massively off of both. They don't care which is in office. And these are the primary programs of the Democrat and Republican parties. They may appear to be different choices, but they both fuel the same power structure. Now, why bother with having two parties when they're actually part of the same system? Well, because to maintain power, it's important to give people a choice while hiding the real structure. We're trained to be devoted to our left or right political leader, and this brilliantly fuels the system while also keeping us in the dark about who really runs things. Then how does this really work? Well, the system basically operates on Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But when it comes to politics, I don't think they're equal. The reaction is typically more extreme than the action. So we had this guy 20 years ago who generated the flip to this guy, generating an opposite reaction to a more extreme warfare candidate, and then a more extreme welfare candidate who's using words like czar to trigger extreme anti-left sentiment. So there's a chance that the next reaction is going to be so extreme to the right that the fascism that's been building for a long time will finally come fully out of hiding. Maybe not, but we'll see whether people will wake up to this process before it's too late. So this reveals how the vortex of the financial empire system hijacks and controls our political system. Left versus right doesn't give us a choice for change because it's a controlled system that further fuels the vortex. So as we continue watching the pendulum swing between left and right, nothing changes. This is dialectical conflict, the method used by the people in power throughout history to control the masses. Our political system is nothing but a big diversion to keep you from seeing the real issue, which is not the question of left versus right, but rather big versus small. The real choice should be between the vortex-driven empire system on top here and the republic on bottom. The republic is just a group of smaller entities like people and neighborhoods, communities and states. This is the old Hamilton versus Jefferson issue from Lesson 1. Hamilton pushed for big empire systems while Jefferson warned against them. and establishment left and right politicians sit at the top of this quadrant. They're both Hamiltonians. And they're the ones that get in office because the banks and corporations put them there. And the few DC politicians like Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul who are actually trying to serve the Republic are extremely rare. They're on the bottom quadrants here. So while we think the two guys on top are radically different, they're actually serving the same system. They have the exact same CFR staff surrounding them making all the decisions. This means Obama has a lot more in common with Bush than with Kucinich, who sits on his side of the aisle. And the banking establishment and corporate system are happy buying elections for people like this because they win either way. Neither of these top two quadrants will do anything about the vortex except fuel it further. And it's sad to see the people who feel the loss of community, the people who really feel this big versus small issue, they vote for this quadrant every time, which just keeps fueling the big, when they really should be voting for the types of people that are down here. But you'll never see money power support these guys. They advocate things that oppose the central vortex, and that's the key difference. If your politicians aren't doing this, they're serving bankers at the top of the vortex. Now, I don't think most of them know it. They're, I guess, decent people, but if they're not willing to learn about this issue, get rid of them. At this point, we can't afford the classic good guy that's ignorant when we're up against the concentrated banking powers fueling the hurricane, building the empire discussed in Lesson 5. So the key pendulum we should be focused on is big versus small, not left versus right. The pendulum has naturally tried to swing back to the small side many times, but as we discussed in earlier lessons, the financial system always prevented that with their bailouts and too big to fail schemes that stole from the small to prop up the big. And there have been some benefits of bigness. I don't deny that, but there's always trade-offs. And now the pendulum has swung so far to the big side that it needs to be allowed to swing back. This is the old liberty versus tyranny debate. It's the republic versus the empire. The Jeffersonian tradition representing the republic against Hamilton's empire system centered in Wall Street and Washington, D.C. Now maybe you're thinking that we can't go back in history, so restoring the republic isn't the answer. And that's certainly an argument that can be made. But whether we go back to the republic or figure out a different solution, make no mistake, we're facing the choice between individual lives, human relationships, and human freedom versus the monolithic, dehumanizing vortex system that controls everything from the center and treats us all as nothing more than digits in a spreadsheet. This is extremely dangerous. I got exposure to this mentality when I was at Harvard Business School. It's very real. The masses are nothing but spreadsheet digits to these people. And I heard classmates from rich Wall Street families say that people like Stalin and Hitler were simply system managers who were just running alternative people management systems. These financiers said things like this aren't a question of morality. You know, like Hitler and Stalin aren't an issue of right versus wrong, but just a matter of efficiency and effectiveness, like which system works best. And I couldn't believe I heard that. I'm not trying to scare you here, but just giving you insight about the people who control our lives. The money powers and the Harvard elites. This is what Wendell Berry said about them. Viewing life as system management is pathological, folks. But that's the mindset of the people who control our lives. So the key to changing our destiny and avoiding a dark future is to break the power of the vortex. And one of the keys to doing that is, again, sovereign money, pumped out by the U.S. Treasury, as we already discussed. Without this, the vortex has no opposing force. Sovereign money flows through the system as an asset, not an interest-bearing debt like our current money system. So it doesn't contribute to the sucking power of the vortex. It can't be sucked from you so easily. It's the best way for you to have any power outside the vortex. And it's the only way to start fixing the problem of the U.S. government working for banks, as we'll talk about next.